5.
Hello, friends. Welcome once again to Bigfoot for Breakfast, home of the mysterious and the macabre, where we hang out in the studio every week, challenging conventional thought.
Well, most weeks.
Some weeks. We are your hosts, Samantha Carter
And Sarah Jones.
We appreciate you so much for joining us once again, or joining us this week for the very first time to hear more of the things you never knew you wanted to know. If you haven't ever done so, please rate and review our show on whichever podcast platform you happen to be listening from. We would appreciate that tremendously. You can add us on Facebook, Twitter, and Snapchat for updates and contest announcements. Also, if you really want to tell us how you feel, good or bad, you can leave us a voicemail. Just call 641-812-2635. Leave your message and we'll play it on the next episode, or one shortly thereafter. Also, you can send us a text message to that number as well. So if you're not feeling brave enough to leave a voicemail, which I understand, you can text us. Get your dramatic voice on.
Okay.
It's time to take them back.
Here it is. The year is 1994. The Friends TV sitcom premiered on NBC. Forrest Gump was the most popular film. The Dallas Cowboys were the Super Bowl champs. The Clementine spacecraft was launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. The first group of women assigned to the U.S. Navy combat ship reported for duty. O.J. Simpson was arraigned for the murders of Nicole Simpson and Ronald Goldman.
If the glove fits, you must acquit. The glove doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Apparently we just acquit.
Either way. Yeah.
Despite lots and lots and lots of evidence. But famous people, lots of perks for having a lot of money.
True story.
Jeff Bezos launched Amazon.com in Bellevue, Washington. Vice President Al Gore coined the term information superhighway. Microsoft began beta testing Windows 95. The Sign by Ace of Base was the #1 song for that year, which I'll never understand ever.
I saw The Sign.
I did not.
And it opened up my eyes.
Nope. Anyway. Pamela Anderson, Jennifer Aniston, and Cindy Crawford were the girls of every 13-year-old boy's dreams. 13-year-old boys like Nicholas Barclay from San Antonio, Texas.
Nicholas was born on December 31st of 1980. His mother's name was Beverly Dollarhide. He had an older brother, Jason, and a sister, Carrie, with whom he resided in a small home in San Antonio, Texas. While we did try to set the basis for an average American teenager, Nicholas didn't necessarily fall into that category. Nicholas had a reputation for getting into trouble. He had a history of being physically and verbally abusive towards his mother, threatening his teachers, stealing, and breaking and entering. He skipped school more times than he went, and he was usually in trouble if he did go. Nicholas had run away from home on more than one occasion. It sounds like he may have been on his way to placement in a group home in the not-so-distant future. On June 13th, 1994, with only $5 in his pocket that his mom had given him, she told him to be home by dinner. But he didn't come home by dinner. Earlier that day, he had been seen playing basketball and had called his mom to come pick him up. She was asleep at the time as she worked the graveyard shift, and his brother Jason refused to wake her up. He was left to find his own way, a mile or two back to his home. A small boy for his age, measuring only 4 foot, 8 inches tall, and weighing in at around 80 pounds, blonde hair, blue eyes. He had 3 tattoos. He was last seen wearing a white shirt, purple pants, and carrying a pink backpack. This time, however, he did not return, not even for more money, for food, or clothes. A day went by, which is the longest he had ever stayed gone, then a week, a month. Perhaps he'd tried to get a ride home from the wrong person.
It was thought by police, and perhaps in the beginning by even his family, that he had run away yet again. Especially considering that the hearing for his placement in the group home was set the very day after he disappeared. The authorities were slow to respond, assuming that he would show up in a day or so. In fact, it had been speculated by some that he hadn't been seen since the 10th and was not reported missing until 3 days later, since it wasn't unusual for Nicholas to leave home for a day or so. But it would be September before any word of Nicholas was heard. On this night, the police received a phone call related to a report by his brother, Jason, that Nicholas was seen trying to break into their garage. So was this at this time that he went missing that his brother reported him, or he saw him months later trying to break back into the garage?
No, this was months later in September.
So why is he calling the police? Why didn't he just go outside and get his brother? His brother Jason called the police, telling the police that Nicholas was breaking into their garage at the time. It was reported that when Jason spotted Nicholas, Jason called out to him and he actually ran away. Makes sense now. So when the police arrived, they searched for Nicholas and they didn't find any trace of him, nor did they find any evidence of an attempted break-in. So it's questionable whether or not Jason actually saw him. What reason would Jason have to make something like that up? There were suspicions and theories, but we'll get into those a little later. It sounds like Nicholas didn't stray far from Jason's influence. Jason had a drug problem which predated his brother's disappearance. On that same note, their mother Beverly had her own issue with addiction to heroin in 1994, but she went on to treatment after her son vanished.
Years would pass. Nicholas gone but not forgotten. And in 1997, something incredible happened. A man in Linares, Spain, yes, you heard me, Spain, contacted the police to make a report of a teenage boy who had been found. According to the documentary The Imposter, the phone call went like this. Quote, "My wife and I are here as tourists. We found a kid about 14, 15 years old. No ID, no documents on him. He seems very young. He's very scared. We tried to get him some food, but he doesn't want it. I think you should come help him." End quote. The dispatcher advised a police car would be on the way, and the caller inquired about their ETA. It would only be about 10 minutes. Nicholas was on his way home. At the time, however, the police in Spain were unaware that this was Nicholas Barclay. They asked him over and over, "What is your name? Where are you from? Where are your parents?" in multiple languages. He did not answer. Eventually, still unable to return him to the proper place, as they did not know where that was, Nicholas was placed in a children's home.
Eventually, it would become necessary for the name of this kid to be known, as he had been in this children's home for a while and not spoken to anyone. Finally, he did speak up. He told them that he was American. He told them that he had run away from home and that he wanted to be the one who called his family. The man who ran the shelter, Jonathan Duran, called the Center for Missing and Exploited Children in Virginia in an effort to identify this mysterious American boy with no name. The contact from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children faxed over a missing poster with Nicholas Barclay's photo on it. Of course, it was in all black and white, so it was still hard to tell. The Center for Missing and Exploited Children got a phone call back from Jonathan Duran. "This is Nicholas. It's him," he said.
A call was made to Nicholas' mother at her place of work, but she wasn't there. According to an interview she did for the documentary The Imposter, a message was left for her that was as follows. Quote, "Someone in Spain has Nicholas. He wants to come home." End quote. Beverly called her daughter Carrie, who was at work. "Are you sitting down?" she asked her. "You're not gonna believe this." Carrie's first mission was to get into contact with him. Her initial contact was with Jonathan Duran. She was advised that Nicholas was scared and traumatized, not ready to talk to anyone yet. She was told he doesn't remember much about his family or his life before the abduction.
Of course, as any family would, they had to go to Spain. They had to go get him to bring him home as soon as possible. As her mother was unable to make the trip, Carrie, with the help of her employer at the time, bought a plane ticket and flew to Spain to identify him. This was her first time out of the United States. The circumstances of his resurfacing defy the typical missing child case. The likelihood of a child being recovered after 3 years in the wind is rare. Finding him in an entirely different country is even more rare. Stranger still was the condition in which she found her now 16-year-old brother, Nicholas, when his sister arrived in Spain.
Before his sister arrived, someone from the American Embassy was sent to meet with Nicholas. With this being such a rare case, the FBI and the American Embassy wanted to make sure that the case was handled with the utmost delicacy and proficiency. When he arrived, however, Nicholas was gone. His emotions had gotten the best of him, and he ran away. The consul and the employee of the children's home went out looking for Nicholas, and eventually they found him and brought him back. The man from the embassy called in to report that this was, as far as he was concerned, an American kid.
Initially, upon his notification of her arrival, Nicholas panicked. Nervous to see his family after so long, he refused to leave his room. He expressed that he was afraid that she wouldn't recognize him and that she would make him stay in Spain. Carrie waited, and eventually, clad in a baseball cap, sunglasses, and a large scarf which covered most of his face, and a pair of gloves, he emerged to be reunited with his big sister.
Immediately, she grabbed him and hugged him, telling him he was silly for not thinking that they would recognize him. In an interview, Carrie said she remembered touching his nose and telling him that she recognized that nose. He looked like his Uncle Pat. "I know it's you," she remembers saying. "I love you and everything's gonna be okay." Nicholas was still gun-shy and not saying much. Carrie had brought some photographs with her, and together they sat down in the visitor's room to look at them. One by one, she went through the pictures with him, making sure he remembered everyone from his life back home. As they spoke about their family, she noted his voice remained soft at a whisper. He had suffered so much after the last few years, as anyone else would think. She couldn't imagine what he'd been through. She noticed as well that he'd picked up an accent. She was in awe of how much he'd grown, how tall he was.
Before she could take him home, they sat before a judge in order to prove that there was a true legal basis behind the claim that he was Nicholas, an American citizen, and that it was Carrie's brother.
They did make them do separate meetings with the judge. They did not see the judge together.
He was asked to identify people from his family photos and various other bits of information to prove that he was who he said he was. The rest of the night passed in peaceful silence as they anticipated the long trip home. The next morning, they woke up and boarded the plane. Nicholas was clearly anxious. In Texas, Beverly, along with Carrie's husband Brian, and her children also headed to the airport anxious with anticipation. On October 18, 1997, Nicholas Barclay finally arrived home to Texas, welcomed with open arms by the family that had been missing him for so long. They played music in the car to try to help ease his nerves and make him feel better.
The next morning, they went for a drive to refamiliarize him with his hometown and some of the people in it. They did their best to be patient and understanding. They understood he had endured a significant amount of trauma, which affected his ability to remember. They didn't know for certain what that trauma was, and they weren't going to push him to talk about it. They were going to give him space and let him talk when he was ready. In the meantime, he would return to high school and try to resume a normal life.
His family made a point to bring him back to a sense of normalcy, a routine. They kept their days relaxed and casual to help ease some of his emotional stress. The whole family rallied to make him feel like home was home again. Everyone except for his brother Jason, who didn't seem to accept him back home quite as openly as everyone else. "I've already figured it out."
Special Agent Nancy Fisher of the FBI San Antonio office in Texas wasn't as keen to give Nicholas an infinite amount of time in which to decide when he was ready to share what had happened. She wanted to know who had abducted him, and she wanted to find them soon. On November 4th of 1997, Nicholas was brought to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children San Antonio office and interviewed. It was finally time to find out what had happened to him.
Nicholas finally opened up and explained that he was kidnapped on his way home from playing basketball. He met 2 other boys and started talking to them. The next thing he knew, there was cloth over his mouth and he passed out. His abductors had put him in a vehicle, driven him to the airport, and tossed the small boy on a plane headed for Europe. Nicholas has become the property of a child sex trafficking ring operation that was operated by high-ranking European military officials. Nicholas had endured rape and torture for the years that he had been gone. He had been severely abused and subjected to experiments over the past 3 years. They experimented on methods to change the appearance of the stolen children to make them unrecognizable. They had put drops in his eyes which caused his beautiful blue eyes to turn brown. They also darkened his hair. One of the more extreme measures that they took, according to Nicholas, was that he wasn't allowed to speak English, only French, which is why he had picked up an accent. The boys were raped on a nightly basis by high-ranking military officers, European, Spanish, and American. Both of Nicholas's hands had been broken as a form of torture, his right hand with a baseball bat. His left foot had been smashed with a crowbar. The boys were burned, forced to eat insects, to wear headphones which poured loud noises into their ears. They were screamed at, their eyes poked with needles. He was beaten for speaking English and forced to listen to recordings which told him, "You aren't you." They were moved from place to place in military planes and never knew where they were. One day he managed to get to a door. He ran and ran, only later to discover that he was in Spain.
The FBI agent was horrified to hear the story that he had to tell and promised to find the people who had done this. Nicholas's story had also caught the attention of media outlets. As she stated in her interview for the documentary The Imposter, Special Agent Nancy Fisher advised the family to absolutely not share this story with the media as she investigates. But in November of 1997, a producer from the TV show Hard Copy had heard the story and called up a private investigator to look into the story and reach out to the family to get an interview with Nicholas for the show. Charlie Parker, private investigator, was now on the case. Charlie met with the family and was present with them as Nicholas did an interview with a local news channel. During this interview, however, his investigator's intuition had began nagging at him. Even his own family had accepted his oddly older appearance, his darker hair, brown eyes, and French accent. And yes, those details did catch Charlie's attention, but it would be another feature that would inspire Charlie to dig deeper. His ears.
Wait, what? Ears have actually been proven to be viable biometric means of identifying a person. Isn't that cool? Obviously, there have been a lot of studies done in the time between now and then, and definitely technology has advanced in the area of biometrics. But it wasn't entirely unheard of back then. If you think about it, an ear has unique structures that aren't necessarily affected by aging, outside of getting bigger. Of course, if you're trying to hide your identification, you can cover up your ears or cut them off or manipulate them in some way. But the point is, the ears have merit as a point of identification. As for Charlie Parker, he was pretty suspicious of Nicholas Barclay's ears. Many things about Nicholas had changed, but his ears should not have been one of them.
So this came about because Charlie was staring at a picture of Nicholas before he had disappeared at the same time that he was doing the interview. And that detail just caught his eye.
Okay. Probably luckily, I'm assuming.
Here we are again with another mystery on our hands. If he wasn't Nicholas, who was he? And why was he pretending to be Nicholas? And more importantly, why was Nicholas's family going along with it? Charlie got on the phone and called Special Agent Nancy Fisher, who told him what any federal agent in the middle of an investigation would have told any other private citizen, investigator or otherwise. Be careful not to interfere with a federal investigation. Agent Fisher had Nicholas taken to Houston to meet with a forensic expert who could help him deal with the trauma that he had endured. Bruce D. Perry, MD, PhD, at Texas Children's Hospital. During this interview, Dr. Perry also noticed that something was off. As Nicholas recounted his traumatic experiences, Dr. Perry expected to see some of the types of physiological changes that are typical of a person who has undergone trauma. Changes in pupil size, body posture, and heart rate. But Nicholas had none of these changes. Also, the French accent. It didn't fit. Dr. Perry was certain now this was not a kid who was raised in an American English-speaking household. This was not Nicholas Barclay.
Holy buckets, what a revolting development this is.
Name that quote. What a revolting development this is.
Hold on. The Life of Riley. Me and Sam used to listen to vintage radio shows while we were going to sleep.
I'd better be shoveling off.
Yes. Such good stuff. If you're ever interested, The Life of Riley. It's one of the funniest. It's awesome. Anywho, moving on. So Dr. Perry notified Agent Fisher of his conclusion after the interview concluded. Naturally, after having a WTF moment, she got on the phone to call the family. Agent Fisher spoke with Carrie and told her that her brother was an imposter. And that she was not to come to the airport to pick him up when they returned from Houston as planned, and that the FBI was going to handle it. Whew! Good thing that got taken care of, right?
Wrong. They did fly back from Houston, and when they got to the airport, Agent Fisher was met by an even more outlandish surprise. Carrie Gibson, there to pick up her fake brother, with open arms and a loving embrace. Like the conversation never happened, and she took him back home. Is it possible that they just wanted Nicholas back so desperately that they were willing to overlook so many things? Is it possible to be so deep in denial? What the heck was going on? First and foremost, who the hell is this guy? While the FBI focused on finding out the identity of the imposter, Charlie Parker went to work on finding out what really happened to the real Nicholas Barclay.
Agent Fisher went to the house in San Antonio and asked Beverly Dollarhide for DNA as well as Nicholas. According to every source on this story, Beverly adamantly refused. According to Agent Fisher, she was unwavering in her assertion that this was her son. She laid down on the floor, refusing to submit a sample, stating, "You can't make me." And just like that, the Barclays were no longer seen as the grieving victims of a tragic crime. They were sus AF. We were going to dig a little deeper into this, but first, let's figure out who this dude is that they refuse to accept is an imposter. A warrant was issued to collect DNA from Nicholas. He was taken in and he was fingerprinted. With the walls closing in on the scam and the high pressure of the situation being reflected in his behavior, Charlie Parker began tailing Nicholas so that he couldn't make a run for it. In December, Nicholas took Brian and Carrie's car on a drive to Oklahoma, and he was pulled over for speeding and he was arrested. He was brought back home to San Antonio, quote, home, just before Christmas, and he went into the bathroom and with a razor began to cut up his own face. He was hospitalized in a psychiatric unit for a few days after that, and he wrote in a notebook, quote, "When you fight monsters, be careful in that process you do not become one," end quote.
Do you recognize that quote?
No.
Criminal Minds has served me well.
Yes, I imagine it has. They have a lot of really good quotes at the end that are very emotional.
Beware that, when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. Friedrich Nietzsche.
Very clever.
Waha.
I can't tell you how many times I hear quotes and I'm like, I've heard that on Criminal Minds.
Right?
Yeah, they're really good at finding good quotes to fit their agenda.
My cats are very philosophical now as well, after watching every season of Criminal Minds 3 times.
Okay, 5 times.
We were matching jammies and everything.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal, providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.
One day on March 5th, 1998, Beverly called Parker to let him know that she now believed that Nicholas was, in fact, not Nicholas. That morning, Nicholas and Charlie met at a diner for pancakes and a chat. During this chat, Nicholas finally made a confession. Meanwhile, Agent Fisher received a call and then a fax. The mystery had been solved. Nicholas Barclay was really Frederic Bourdin, a Frenchman.
A Frenchman.
A 23, not 16-year-old, who was wanted by Interpol. From the very beginning, this had been a ruse.
Dun dun dun!
A ruse. So the call to the Spanish police that initially had been made reporting that a child had been found was made by Bourdin himself. When the police arrived, they found him alone with his demeanor and behavior well thought out and calculated to manipulate the authorities into believing that he was this lost, scared, damaged child so that they wouldn't ask too many questions. He wanted them to feel emotionally invested, guilty. He wore clothes that hid his features. The coat, hat, scarves, sunglasses, and gloves, they were all designed to hide his age. His plan was to be taken to a youth home where he could live comfortably as somebody else. His cush plan was disrupted when they pushed him to reveal his identity. He had to think quickly. Do you remember Jonathan Duran, the man who called the Center for Missing and Exploited Children looking for a missing kid, who spoke to the Barclay family as an advocate for Nicholas? Yeah, that was Bourdin as well. He really ran into trouble when the American consulate and the FBI got involved. When Jonathan Duran was sent a color photo of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy whose identity he had claimed, he knew he was screwed. He ran away to get out of this tangled lie, but he was unsuccessful. He dyed his hair and had a girl at the youth center give him the tattoos described on the missing poster. He delayed going out to meet Nicholas's sister because he knew that he was going to be busted. He spoke as little as possible to hide his accent. Even he was astounded to have made it so far as to even get a hug of acceptance from the family of Nicholas Barclay. He never expected that this would work, and that he would get as far as he did. He was able to convince a judge by identifying family members in photos because Carrie had already shown him the picture, unbeknownst to this judge.
Frederic knew after his DNA was collected that he could no longer go on as he had been. But also, he too had become suspicious of the family who had so lovingly and willingly taken him into their arms and their home.
Okay, so wait, let's unpack this just real quick. So basically, we are at a point where a kid goes missing, a family's missing him. Another kid in Spain, or a man in Spain, decided to run this big scam where he could live in a group home for free, basically. But he's not a kid, so he had to make up a big story, got him emotionally invested, panicked, said that he was Nicholas Barclay, didn't realize that it was going to cause the waves that it did in the FBI and everybody would get involved, dug himself a deeper hole, came to meet the family thinking it wasn't going to work, and was very surprised when it actually did and they accepted him. So this is where we're at, right?
Correct.
And now he's super suspicious of them.
So initially when he was in the home and they asked him, you have to tell us who you are or we're going to get DNA. So he finally said, I'm an American, I ran away, and I want to be the one that calls my family. Because of the time change, I'm going to have to call them tomorrow. So over that night, he got on the phone pretending to be Jonathan Duran, called numerous different law enforcement agencies in the U.S. asking about missing kids. They gave him the number for the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who he called, and they said, well, we do have this one case, and that's when they sent him the missing poster, which was black and white. So he was like, yeah, I could pull this off. And then he got the color poster and was like, shit.
Not even close.
Not even close.
So then he panicked and did the tattoo thing.
And dyed his hair.
And dyed his hair.
Waha.
So that's where we're at.
So from the very beginning, Bourdin thought Carrie had coached him with the pictures, showed him every one, and told him everything. She'd put it into his head. She pushed him to become someone that they both knew that he wasn't. If that wasn't her intention, don't you think that she'd have told the judge that her test wasn't a valid one, as he had already seen the photos in question, heard the names from Carrie's own mouth? There was no way that they didn't know he wasn't Nicholas. That was Bourdin's own thought anyway. They didn't just passively accept what he said. They didn't just go along with it. They were as aggressive as pushing the story as he was.
So basically, all these tests were coming about, but they were helping him along because it seemed like they already knew, right?
That's what he was thinking.
Yeah, because, he's facing this family that he does not know, and they have this missing kid, and he's thinking they're not going to accept him. And so it's weird to him even when he's got these weird things to prove in order to prove who he is, and the family's like, well, here's all the information for that so that you can pass these tests. And if they believed he was Nicholas, they wouldn't even worry about it.
Well, I don't know that she, obviously she probably didn't know that he was going to be required to do this test. Maybe, I don't know. But the first thing she did was show him all these pictures, tell him who all these people were and all these situations, these places, all these things.
So it just looks weird. It looks real weird.
So they were, pushing the story, if not more than he was. Frederic became convinced that they were hiding something. Frederic was convinced that they needed him to be Nicholas to end the search because they knew what happened to Nicholas. Nicholas was dead and they'd killed him. Frederic called the San Antonio Police Department and reported his suspicions, and an investigation was launched.
So now, of course, Beverly, Nicholas's mother, was a suspect, and so was his brother Jason, because Jason was living with Nicholas and his mother at the time of the disappearance. According to the neighbors, friends, and even law enforcement, who were no strangers to the Barclay house, the situation there was volatile at best. Jason, who was in his 20s at the time, came to live with them, apparently to try to help Beverly gain some control back over Nicholas, because he had been acting out. This was likely just adding fuel to the fire, as Jason was struggling with a cocaine addiction and was also known, like Nicholas, for his violent temper. Police responded to the house on more than one occasion relating to domestic disturbances. This, to me, begs the question, was Nicholas's behavior the result of his home environment, or was it the cause?
Beverly Dollarhide was given a polygraph test regarding everything about Nicholas Barclay's disappearance. The first test was administered and she passed, but Special Agent Fisher believed this couldn't be correct, so she made Dollarhide repeat the polygraph, and then again. Her third test did not go well. She failed every single question. The polygrapher joked that the machine practically jumped off the table by her lies. Her answers appeared to be false on every single question. According to the third test, she knew where her son was. She knew what happened to him. She knew. The polygrapher questioned her about her results, and she became very agitated, and she left. That's really about the extent of the information that you could find about this particular element of the case, and it makes you wonder, how did she manage to pass the first 2 times? And what was the difference? Could it have been the increased stress of having to take a 3rd test that affected her results on the last test? Is it possible that she's known the whole time what happened to her son and been a party to his disappearance? Or, at the very least, an accomplice? Perhaps that's what contributed to her other son's untimely death from overdose. Because Jason overdosed on cocaine in 1998 and was unable to be interviewed or questioned about his brother's disappearance any further. Was it guilt? We can only speculate.
That was exactly what Frederic Bourdin thought. That Nicholas's older brother, Jason, had killed him and buried his body somewhere, and that the rest of the family had either helped or they knew about it. The reason for this thought process was that when he met Jason, his behavior was really odd. Bourdin said this of that experience, quote, "When he came to see me, he didn't look at me like Nicholas. He didn't pretend to look at me like Nicholas. And then he said good luck to me, and then he left," end quote. Jason knew that he was an imposter right from the beginning, and he didn't want to call him out so he didn't have to face his guilt. Or perhaps the search would be over and he would be free and clear of this crime. And like I said, it is suspected that even if their mother was not involved directly, it's most likely that her son confessed to her about it. So she was aware and complicit in keeping the secret, putting on the charade for all of those years and going so far as to play along when the imposter pretended to be him. Quote, "They knew that I was not Nicholas," end quote. Bourdin said this in The Imposter.
Quote, "They didn't believe a word that I said, but they were good at not showing it. I remember in Spain, Carrie did everything for me. When I didn't know something, she told me. That's the house we used to live in. That's my daughter, your niece. Do you remember that? Remember that? Remember that? Remember that?" Over and over again. She wanted to put it in my head so I would never forget. She couldn't say that I wasn't her brother. Did she believe it or not? If you ask me, no. She did not believe for a second that I was her brother. She decided that I was going to be her brother. End quote.
While Bourdin is absolutely a shady son of a gun, he also has a point. The whole situation was weird. I don't necessarily take his thoughts or claims as gospel. Among the claims that he made about the family of Nicholas Barclay, he made plenty of other claims that were questionable and contradictory at best. At one point, he made the claim that he had known Nicholas while he was in Spain and the boy was alive. He never was able to offer any details as proof of that claim. In fact, in his own words, he had only learned Nicholas Barclay's name when he was pretending to be Jonathan Duran while speaking to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. On another occasion, he claimed that he had proof that Nicholas was dead. He eventually recanted ever having met Nicholas and stated that he really knew absolutely nothing about the case.
He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, which was actually more than twice what the sentencing guidelines suggested. I feel like that's pretty insignificant considering all the damage that he caused, presuming the family was innocent and victimized. He had deceived the American consulate and been declared an American citizen. Lucky for us, he wasn't some spy with a greater scheme. Instead, he was a con artist with psychological issues who wanted attention. Why had he become this man on a mission to become someone else? According to interviews, Bourdin had been looking for, quote, love and affection, and attention that he never received as a child. His mother was 17 years old when he was conceived. His father was a man from Algeria. Bourdin's mother's father was very racist and disapproved of the relationship. She was told to abort the child, which of course she did not. Apparently, the feeling of being unwanted sadly followed him throughout his life. In an interview, Bourdin lamented, quote, as long as I can remember, I wanted to be someone else. Nobody ever gave me a childhood because to give a kid a childhood, you had to love them, end quote. Really, I can feel for him. I really can. But that is definitely not an excuse to take advantage of other families, particularly ones that have suffered such a terrible loss.
This wasn't even his first time. He had already pretended to be an orphan several times, changing his name and convincing people that he was much younger than he was. In 1992, he was Frederic Beard, as well as Jimmy Peter Manfred in Luxembourg. In 1993, he was Benjamin Donison and Alex Ross Milan. He had been Thomas Wilson in Brussels in 1995. He had assumed multiple other identities over the years. 16-year-old runaway Hernie White. He had been Marco Fernandez, Benjamin Kent in Moscow, Arnaud Oriens, Robin Morins, Mark Selepin, Alex Dole, Jimmy Sark, and who knows how many others. I really wasn't able to find much information on the other identities that he had assumed or stolen. He had been all over Europe under the guise of different names, pretending to be younger, taking advantage of youth shelters. It sounds like the case of Nicholas Barclay was just the most elaborate of his schemes.
It seems like there was no line that he would not cross. Even from prison, he was calling families of missing children, claiming to have information about their missing loved ones. After he was released from prison, he was deported back to France. Upon returning to France from the U.S. in 2003, you would think he would have learned his lesson, but that simply was not the case. He moved to Grenoble and assumed the identity of a French boy named Leo Bali, who had been missing since 1996. He was 6 years old at the time of his disappearance, while out with his father and some of his father's friends. They were out on a mountain while his father was installing a tent. The 6-year-old disappeared. Despite extensive searches, no trace of the boy was ever found. Once again, in this case, he was subjected to DNA testing, which proved that he was not Bali.
In August 2004, he was back in Spain impersonating an adolescent named Ruben Sanchez Espinoza, whose mother had been killed in the Madrid bomb attacks. When the police found out the truth, they had him deported back to France yet again. Still, he persisted with this charade. Charade. In June of 2005, Bourdin passed himself off as a 15-year-old Spanish orphan, Francisco Fernandez, spending a month attending junior high in Pau, France. He claimed that his parents had been killed in a car accident. He dressed as a teenager, adopted a proper walking style, covered his receding hairline with a baseball cap, and used face creams. On June 12th, an administrator from his school saw a television program about his exploits and exposed him for the imposter that he was. On September 16th, 2005, he was sentenced to 4 months in prison using the previous false identity of Leo Bali.
In August of 2007, Frederic Bourdin was married to a French woman named Isabelle after having dated for a year. Together, they gave birth to 5 children and lived happily in France. On March 23rd of 2017, Bourdin made a Facebook post stating that Isabelle had left him for another man, claiming she had been unhappy for 10 years and very, very unhappy in recent months. I wonder if she'd been aware of his past when they got married? I don't know. Isabelle took the children and, in an ironic course of events, disappeared. In an interview for the Daily Mirror with David Grann in 2008, Bourdin said that he would never impersonate anyone again.
After his wife Isabelle gave birth to their first child, Grann got a call from Bourdin, who proudly announced the birth of his first child and that it was a girl. Grann took the opportunity to ask Bourdin if he had become a new person now that he was a father and a husband. Bourdin's response to this was, "No, this is who I am." With this fresh start, Bourdin revealed that his reasoning for having done the things that he had done was that there was never much love when he was growing up. He said, "Nobody ever gave a damn about me, and to know that if I changed my identity, the reward would be that someone would eventually care about me, and hell yeah, I was born again. I was reborn."
So I do hate that the story of Nicholas Barclay inevitably puts a great spotlight on the crimes of Bourdin rather than focusing on Nicholas himself. Sadly, there is very little information available outside of what we've shared. I fear no one will ever learn the truth of what happened to this 13-year-old boy who disappeared on his way home in 1994. His life prior to his disappearance sounds like it was far from a fairy tale. Part of me hopes that he did indeed run away and find a happy, healthy life and grew up safely. The private investigator Charlie Parker is still convinced that young Nicholas Barclay is dead, perhaps at the hands of his brother, with the complicity of his mother and maybe even his sister, and is buried somewhere in San Antonio. Charlie had visited the owner of the home where they lived when Nicholas disappeared. He and the homeowner discussed some odd behavior by the owner's dog when he was in the backyard, which made Charlie even more suspicious. The owner reported that the dog would spend a lot of time in a specific corner of the yard, even digging in the area. He said that he had noticed while the dog was digging that there had been plastic or some other material buried in the area of the yard. The two dug in the area, but they were unable to find any evidence to prove Parker's theory, and the case remains cold and unsolved to this day.
Many people who follow the Nicholas Barclay case made note of some similarities to the famous disappearance of another boy named Bobby Dunbar, whose case has also made headlines in the United States. 4 years old, Bobby Dunbar went with his parents on a fishing trip in Louisiana on August 23, 1912. The Dunbars made their way north towards Swayze Lake for a trip that would change their family forever. Bobby suddenly disappeared from the face of the earth while out in the wilderness, and the family began searching for him in that area. After an 8-month investigation that was funded personally by the Dunbar family, a boy was found in Mississippi who was claimed to be the missing Dunbar boy. The boy, called Bruce, traveled with a man named William Walters, who said that he had been given full custody of the boy by a woman named Julia Anderson, who used to work for the family. When Walters was arrested for kidnapping, Anderson even came to testify for Walters in his trial and backed his story about her child. Because the kid in question was born out of wedlock and neither of the two could afford lawyers, Walters was convinced, and the boy was taken away from them and given to the Dunbars as their own son, Bobby. In 2003, a DNA test revealed that the boy had in fact not been Bobby Dunbar and was Bruce Anderson. So what happened to the real Bobby? It's been assumed that he likely drowned in the lake, which is definitely sad. So while the case is similar and not quite the same, there didn't really seem to be any nefarious intentions behind the swap.
Nefarious.
Except how super sad that man lost his kid and he grew up with another family.
Because the family that was looking for their kid had money and he didn't.
Yeah, basically they just had more money and they got him, which is horrible.
And they even questioned whether or not, that this was actually their kid, but they went along with it because
they just wanted him, basically, which is horrible.
On the other hand, the case of Timothy Pitson is quite similar. Pitson went missing from Aurora, Illinois in May of 2011 after his mother, Amy Fry Pitson, took him out of school to go on a 3-day trip to a zoo and water parks. Not long after, his mother committed suicide, leaving a note that said her son was safe but would never be found. A 23-year-old man from Medina, Ohio named Brian Michael Reaney shows up claiming to be the now 14-year-old missing boy. Of course, DNA would prove otherwise. It's disgusting how many types of these cases there are out there.
Every year, the FBI gets reports on average more than 400,000 missing children. In 2019, there were 421,394 NCIC entries for missing kids. In 2018, the total number of missing children entries into NCIC were 424,066. According to missingkids.org. Of those missing child reports in 2019, 91% of those cases were considered endangered runaways, 4% family abductions, 4% critically missing young adults, ages 18 to 20, less than 1% were non-family abductions, and 1% were lost, injured, or otherwise missing children. Also from missingkids.org, it was reported that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's forensic artists have age progressed more than 7,000 images of long-term missing children, as well as creating more than 595 facial reconstructions for unidentified deceased children. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is currently assisting with more than 691 cases of unidentified children's remains, and so far has assisted in 159 identifications.
The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children also participates in the Amber Alert program, which is a voluntary partnership between broadcasters, transportation agencies, law enforcement agencies, and the wireless industry to activate an urgent bulletin in the most serious child abduction cases. I've gotten like 3 in the last week. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children serves as the secondary distributor of these alerts. To date, 1,000 children have been successfully recovered as a result of the Amber Alert program, including 75 recoveries credited to the Wireless Emergency Alert Program, according to missingkids.org. I feel like it's so important to bring attention to these cases and to the resources that are in place that work tirelessly to find them and bring them home. If you are able, financial donations to organizations like this are invaluable.
And that's it for this episode of Bigfoot for Breakfast. Thank you again for following us down the rabbit hole. Keep listening as we continue to spiral through various mysteries of the universe. If you want to contact us for any reason, shoot us an email at bigfootforbreakfast@outlook.com. Send us a Facebook message or post on our wall. We love memes. Let's get interactive. Send us some memes. You can also follow us on Instagram and send us messages on there. Don't forget about the Twitter. Also, you can leave us a voicemail and just let us know what you think of the show. We'll play it on the next episode. That number is 641-812-2635. Don't worry, it's just a voicemail, so you won't get caught in any awkward interactions with either one of us.
You're welcome.
Thank you again for listening. Until next time.
I said good day.
Come at me, bro.